Welcome back, everybody. This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us. Mike Neal is the senior chaplain for the Washington State Patrol, Department of Fish and Wildlife Police. He served 30 years as a fish and wildlife officer, 15 years as a police firearms instructor, 16 years as a police dog handler. He's a born-again Christian who has been married to his wife, Susanne, for 41 years. In 1981, the couple lost their son, Ryan, who was born 3 months premature. In 2006, Neal's faith was tested when his daughter, Susanne, died after being struck by a car. He ultimately decided to accept his loss as part of God's plan. He's the author and illustrator of the book The Miracle of Africa, an adventure novel that explores big life questions through the lens of faith. And he's with us on This Week in America. Mike Neal with us on the program. Mike, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Hi, Rick. Thanks for having me on.
I'm really impressed with the book, and if you go to the website, which is very simple, Mike Neal, and that's NEIL.org, information on the book, and you do some great work with illustrations. In fact, the one place I saw it had artist first and then author second, and I'm not sure what I would put first. But
I've been an artist a lot longer than been an author.
I was going to say, either you did it alphabetically or that was your first love. In being an artist, you do an excellent job. A lot of examples, great examples at Mike's website, which is mikeneal.org. I want to talk about the main theme of what you're talking about in the book and that you're talking about publicly, which is basically, do animals go to heaven? And I can understand in your relationship as a dog handler that we'd like to think there's something more. They become part of the family. We are so attached to them. And you said that people say that animals have no eternal soul, but I found that hard to believe. Why did you find that hard to believe and not accept it, and then did the research to come up with your answer?
Well, I came to faith in 1994 as a result of losing my second dog. We had a merger between Department of Fisheries and Department of Wildlife here in Washington State. And a new administration came in and said, we're not going to have police dog program anymore. You can't take your dog in your patrol car anymore. And it brought me to my knees. I ended up having to give the dog away because police dogs aren't pets. They're working dogs. They're partners. He deserved to be able to work. He was full of life. He was an amazing tracker and just an amazing dog. He was any police dog handler's dream, and I knew that I couldn't be selfish and leave him at my house just to become a pet. So I ended up giving him away, but 6 months later, he died of stomach torsion, and I think it was brought on by separation anxiety. I know why it killed him. It almost killed me. In fact, I believe that it did kill me, and that I was born again.
Mike Neal, our guest on the program. Mike Neal, and the Neal is spelled N-E-I-L. His website is mikeneal.org. The book is The Miracle of Africa. That's a novel, and we'll talk about that. Set in 1911, we're talking about the question that he was facing, do animals go to heaven? Talk about the research, because for all of us who have animals, we hope there's some place they go as well. Talk about the research, because I think it gives hope to all of us.
Well, in 1994, when I came to faith, I became a student of the Bible, and I couldn't read it enough. I couldn't get enough of it. And I began to realize that animals, whether or not they have a soul or not, is sort of above my pay grade. It's something that God knows. It's nothing that He really put in the Bible. And I've heard many scholars say, well, because an animal doesn't have a soul, then they don't have an eternal purpose. But I began to realize that they did have an eternal purpose, that God has an eternal purpose because He's an eternal God. And He's not going to create something so beautiful and then destroy it or cast it off and make it not part of who He is and a place that He has made so incredible, so amazing that we can't even understand what it is. But so I began to look at the scriptures because I had heard people say, well, it's not something the Bible writers really never talked about because it wasn't a question they really had to ponder. But there's much in the Bible that specifically says and proves that animals are going, because I found in Job 12:7 through 10, it says, "Ask the animals, and they will tell you, for which of these does not know the hand of God has done all this?" Knowing is not knowing what God has done. Is that not faith? And is that not how each and every one of us are saved? We're saved by our faith. And so then I looked in Hebrews. I found in Hebrews 1 it says that Christ is the heir of all things. Well, he's not interested in my truck or my bank account as being heir to. He's heir to the heavenly things that are created here through him. Those are the things that Christ is heir to. And if he was to even one, if even one was not released into his care, then the Bible would not be true. It would make a promise not true. And if you start taking the Bible apart, if you start one by one saying, well, this can't be true, it's a house of cards. Everything in the Bible has to be true. Otherwise, who's going to decide what's true and what isn't?
When you found this out, how comforting was that to you in using this knowledge in talking to others who've gone through the loss of a pet? How comforting is this information?
I think it's a message of hope, and it's a message that I've taken in the last month all around the country. The the thing is that animals are innocent. They didn't fall with man's sin. They are not held accountable for their sin, and that is the true reason why they are eternal. But it's comforting. It is a comforting message. The question is not whether your animal's going to heaven. The question is whether or not you're going to heaven.
Mike Neal, our guest on the program. The book is The Miracle of Africa. This is a novel adventure that explores big life questions through the lens of faith. Mike Neal is the guest. The program is This Week in America. Our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Mike's website is Mike Neal, and that's NEIL.org. Information available. It's an excellent website. A lot of great information there in the book on his artwork, on so much that has happened in your life. And let's talk about that. I mentioned in the beginning going through the loss of your son Ryan that was born 3 months premature, the death in 2006 of your daughter Susanne, and in reading about her, she sort of jumps off the page as we're reading it with her personality, and obviously still impacts your life in a very affirmative way to this day. So many times when we go through problems like that, we ask the question, why? And you are saying, no, don't ask the question why, ask the question what now, why will be answered later. Explain that, because that's so important. People have their faith shaken when something happens, and they ask the question why, and not able at that time to put it in perspective. Explain your sequence and how you got where you're able now to be empathetic to other people because you understand what they're going through.
Right, and really, that is the greatest, one of the greatest quotes is in Hamlet, the first line in Hamlet, to be or not to be, that's the question. But God answered that for me, that says not to be but to become. That is the answer. God doesn't want us to be anything. God wants us to be changing, always growing, always becoming. And I believe that unless you are willing to change, unless you are willing to become something else, that we just hold on to things too tight. We hold on to the moment. We hold on to things so tight that we're not. God can't change us, and that's the whole purpose. Rick, I don't know how I can say this. Doesn't make really a lot of sense to me, but the fact is, I can tell you this: that the events that happened to me 8 years ago, losing a 27-year-old daughter, were the best thing that ever happened in my life. And not because it was the easiest thing or it was the funnest thing, or that I didn't cry a bucket of tears, that I won't miss her every day until I see her again, but it was the best thing because of how it changed me. Nothing else could have changed me the way that changed me. I believe that you have to hold everything that you have in this life in an open hand to God, and that is how God changes us, by putting things in our life and taking things out. And we get so attached, so unwilling to let things go. But that's how we heal, is by holding things in an open hand to Him and letting Him have them back.
When people turn to you for advice, I mentioned senior chaplain of the Washington State Patrol, the Department of Fish and Wildlife Police. You have such credibility because you've been there. So often people will say, and it's almost hollow words, they're trying to find something to say to comfort us, yet it's like, I'm going through this, you're not. You appreciate that they're trying to be helpful, but when you're saying something, it comes from your soul. It comes from your life, what you've experienced, how you got through this. It has to give you great credibility as someone who's able to, again, be empathetic to other people.
Well, and I'm careful as a chaplain never to say, look, I know what you're going through,
Right.
because I don't know what they're going through. I didn't know the person that they've lost. I don't know the relationship they had. I know the kind of relationship I had with a beautiful daughter who was so incredible. I don't even think I can describe the kind of relationship that a father and a daughter have. I know that my wife lost her best friend, but I didn't lose a best friend. I'm not sure that there's any guy in the world who has a daughter that can really explain the kind of relationship they have with her. But I think it's beyond a best friendship. But yeah, that really truly. I think that there's no one that can say, well, you've never gone through anything in your life, so you don't know what I'm going through. I mean, I have been through some things in my life. I did get assaulted in 1988 with a guy with a .300 Magnum who stuck a rifle in my chest over a hunting license check, and I suffered post-traumatic stress. I've been sued for false arrest. I've had my kids on the school bus threatened that they were going to burn their house down and kill their parents. And I mean, being a game warden in a small town, that's what your kids get. So I've been through some things. I have some life experience, and I think I am able to speak with some credibility.
You're listening to This Week in America. Information available on our guest, Mike Neal, at our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Neal is Neil. Information, of course, at his website, which is mikeneal.org. Get a link on if you don't remember that name and need to get information on the book. It's an excellent website. The book is called The Miracle of Africa. And Mike, I understand this, what took you 6 years actually to write this book. It's an interesting premise. Talk about this fascination with animals and looking at it again through the lens of faith.
Well, I've always been a hunter my whole life. My grandfather was a game protector in the 30s, 40s, and 50s in Washington State, and he was killed when I was 10 years old in an accident where a caterpillar rolled over on top of him that he was taken off of a truck. And I was 10 years old on the day of his funeral, and I told my dad I was going to be a game warden, they called him then, that I was going to be a game protector. And I never lost sight of that. It was something that I always wanted to do. So the book really was a result of meeting a guy who was an old-time African hunter. He lived in a small town over here in Washington called Ellensburg. His name's Chuck Lathrop. And he started telling me stories about hunting, and with he and his wife had Alzheimer's. I never got to meet his wife, Betty. He's 95 years old now. He told me here a couple months back when I talked to him that he was on a short fuse. But but I was just very inspired by him. And he had this huge collection of old African classic books, and he gave me a book from Teddy Roosevelt called African Game Trails, and I just poured through it. And I read that book, and then I started buying books off the internet, African classics, because he had this collection, and I just started buying them, and I read like 25 books on the period. But in all of the books that I read, I realized that I never, ever read a book of an adventure story that talked about faith. And I thought, what a great story this would be about a guy who takes his wife on safari and has a conversion and asks all the big life questions and through this story of dialogue and the characters finds out the true miracle of life.
The book is called The Miracle of Africa. Mike Neal is our guest on the program. His website is MikeNeal.org. Books available all across the country. We're rapidly running out of time on the program. I want to talk about what you did a safari in 2005.
I went, my wife and I took safari in 2005 pretty much to authenticate the book. I knew that if I wrote a book about Africa, everyone would say, well, have you ever been to Africa? So I wanted to be able to do that. It was a dream of mine ever since I was a kid. A kid growing up, I had the romantic idea I wanted to be a game warden in Africa, and so it was a lifelong dream for me to be able to go. And it was I actually finished the book in the final pages. I finished the book in Africa.
How did, when you weigh the reality of what you're seeing as you're there on safari, with all of the expectations that you had, the visions of what you were going to see, how did those two meet? Did they meet?
Yeah, I had to pretty much just focus on the animals because the place that I wrote about had been gone for many, many, many years. The safari that I wrote about was kind of the end of the great foot safaris and the advent of using vehicles on safari. So I wrote about a romantic time, but really Africa hasn't changed all that much. And so it was, for me, it was just it was a trip of a lifetime. It was a very inspiring time.
And you're working on a sequel, I understand, that's going to be out, summer of 2015?
Right. It's called Africa, Heart and Soul. It's about Africa during World War I, and my secondary characters stay in Africa. My main characters go home, and it's their story about life in Africa on a farm, and it's about man's greatest adventure, which is war.
Well, this book is called The Miracle of Africa. It's available all across the country. Like I say, it's at Mike's website, MikeNeal.org. Mike Neal is the artist, author, and founder of the Washington State Chaplain Foundation, our guest on This Week in America. A minute or so left in the program, and I would love to have you back on the show, and I would like to talk, something you're very proud about is the Washington State Chaplain Foundation. Talk about how important that is, the work that you do, and just thinking about law enforcement, what they see in family situations, family disturbances that they literally every day that they confront, and the danger that they confront. Talk about that in your job and what you're able to offer to all of these officers.
Well, yeah, I'd love to come back on and talk about this, but police officers, and I talk to the cadet class every session at the end of the cadet class, and I say, when you leave here, you're going to get a backpack because that's what you get assigned to when you leave. You won't see it, you won't feel it. It'll be light, but you'll take it with you when you leave the academy and when you get out on the street, and you'll put it on. And as you begin to go through your career, when you go to your first fatal, you'll look around there and you'll find a good-sized rock and you'll throw it in your pack. When you get home some evening and you have a big fight with your wife because you're so wrapped up in your work that you're neglecting your children, you're going to go out in the backyard, find a rock, and stick it in your pack. Then you're gonna see old people die. You're gonna have to go and tell families that their 16-year-old boy has been killed on the highway. You're going to have to go through all of these things, and as you go through your career, your pack is going to get heavier and heavier and heavier, and you're going to think that you're not able to handle the job anymore, and because the pack is going to get so heavy. You're not going to be able to tell your spouse about this. You're not going to be able to tell your best friend. You're not going to be able to tell your work partner or your sergeant or your lieutenant or your captain that you're not able to handle the job, that the pack's getting too heavy. But as a chaplain, we are ordained, and we are able, through being able to talk about these situations and helping people, we're able to get the rocks out of the pack because we have the ability for a confidential conversation.
Well, there's another conversation for at least 20 minutes to a half an hour in talking about all the topics you threw out there, and we will have you back in the program. Our guest has been Mike Neal, that's Neil. The book is The Miracle of Africa, Mike Neal. The website, MikeNeal.org. A lot of great information at the website. You can see, I mentioned being an artist and illustrator. You can see all of that available at Mike's website. Mike, it's a pleasure. You're an inspiration to many people. Great having you with us on the program, and look forward to having you back with us.
Thank you so much, Rick. This has been great.
Thank you. Been our pleasure, and you're listening to This Week in America, website thisweekinamerica.us.